Rare games. Talk about a retro gaming buzzword that gets thrown around, and no, not just in the hearts of N64 fans who love the developer Rare. I'm talking about rare as an adjective. If a game is considered rare, then in theory it didn't have a lot of copies produced and is consequently hard to find. But of course some people just say, yeah, whatever, Dad, I'm gonna describe any game that's valuable as rare because it makes it sound more exotic. Something I never get tired of seeing is people trying to say games like Super Mario Sunshine, Contra, and Smash Bros are rare because they sell for a decent amount. Oh wait, actually, I do get tired of that because it's just flat out wrong. Copies of those games are common. You want to see a copy of a game that's rare? Get a load of this. A copy of Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine signed by the Timmy. Now this is rare. And yet, when I went to the bank to apply for a loan and offered it as collateral, they said no. What's up with that? Well, turns out rarity isn't the only thing that drives up the price of a game. Something is only valuable if there is demand for it. In fact, this is part of perhaps the most basic rule of economics. An item's value is determined by both supply and demand, not just supply. So even if a game is extremely common, if there's enough demand for it, then the price will still go up. Super Smash Bros. Melee was the GameCube's best-selling game, and for the love of cheese, look how much that sells for. Consequently, if a game is in short supply and has even a little bit of demand, it can drive up the price. Yeah, zero demand isn't enough. It needs at least a little. Then, of course, there are the situations where a game is both in short supply and high demand, which results in a hot plate of video game prices suck. However, I do understand why people are so intrigued by the idea of rare games. After all, one of the most fun things about going back to older consoles is checking out some of the games you may have missed, and rare games are more likely to be those games. And what could be more tragic than a great game that didn't get the attention it deserved? That being said, some people definitely go too far with it, becoming borderline obsessed with owning rare games. Call me crazy, but focusing on games you think you'll enjoy should always be the top priority. Not that some rare games aren't great, but there's definitely some rare games that are rare for a reason, being that they weren't good games. They deserve to not sell well. The reason why the secondhand market isn't flooded with copies of Mr. Nuts is because it's Mr. Nuts. I mean, the video game buying public definitely misses some games that they should have paid more attention to, but in general, I'd say they have more hits than misses overall. When it comes to the retro gaming community nowadays, things can get a little bit weird when it comes to evaluating rare games. I noticed the value of certain games influencing people's opinions, and this can go both ways. People may be tempted to exaggerate how good a game is that they do have because of its rarity or value, and on the flip side, they may be tempted to bash a game they don't have because wouldn't life just be so much simpler if you didn't have to pay the stupid prices Musha goes for? Ideally, games would just be evaluated for what they are as games, independent of all that. A rare game isn't worth owning if it's not good, sure, but I would also say that one rare game, if it is good, is worth owning over 20 mediocre games. Say hello to Shining Force 3 and the 20 mediocre Saturn games that aren't surrounding it. What I also find interesting is the games that call into question what it even means to be rare. Earthbound is a game that gets brought up quite a bit. It didn't sell gangbusters at the time of release, but it also didn't have an abysmal amount of copies produced either. It was around. Thing is, nowadays it's practically just as popular as all the other Super Nintendo games that did sell well. As a result, even the slightest deficit in supply really shows itself when combined with the high demand in the form of a high price. We've got a similar deal with Radiant Silvergun. From what I understand, this game is actually somewhat plentiful, but it's just the first Saturn import everybody wants. Ultimately, what the game costs is what people are going to look at more than rarity because it's more defined and what you're going to have to deal with if you want to buy the game. It costs this amount of dollars. Plus, how rare is any game really? Despite the prices sucking, there's almost no game that you can't hop onto eBay at any given time to purchase with plenty of copies available. Except for my Timmy cartridge, haha! Thing is, once a game develops a reputation as being rare, or even just simply valuable, you can bet your life that anybody willing to sell the game will gladly do so. I want to loop back to the Sega Saturn though, because this is a case where the console itself didn't sell very well, and as a result, even a lot lot of its more popular games could be considered valuable. Pretty much every game for it that's popular nowadays isn't cheap. Definitely a shame considering what a good console it is. And Saturn fans are just like, hey, we tried. We were buying the good games for the console back then, there just weren't enough of us. You were all too busy buying Gran Turismo for the PS1, which nobody gives a darn about anymore. I tell ya. Perhaps the hardest game to track down for the Sega Saturn, and this game has developed quite the reputation over the years, is Virtua Fighter 2 in a sleeve. Good luck finding this one. Nah, it's Panzer Dragoon Saga. This is a game that I would say legitimately qualifies as rare. It is said to have only had 20,000 copies initially released in North America, with an additional 2,000 to 5,000 copies released after that. Might seem like a large number until you realize that's spread out over an entire population. To put things into perspective with an extreme example on the opposite end of the spectrum, Mario Kart 8 on Nintendo Switch has sold over 30 million copies. I think one of the key things that contributed to Panzer Dragoon Saga's rarity was the fact that it came out right at the end of the console's life cycle. Sega, as well as quite a few of its fans, were focused on the Dreamcast coming soon at that point, leaving this game somewhat ignored. Quite a few games end up being more rare as the result of being released late in a console's life cycle. After all, there's less time that the game will be on store shelves before the newer stuff comes barreling its way in. It makes sense, and how can you avoid it? I mean, ideally you want to be supporting a console with plenty of new games through its entire life cycle, although you could say some consoles didn't get enough support at any point in their life cycle. The last thing that I'd like to bring up in relation to rare games is something that actually bothers me, and that would be people who see rare games as an investment. Typically, the prices of these games only go up in price, and people look at them as something they can buy that will appreciate in value. Personally, my games could be worth pennies and you still couldn't pull them from my cold, dead grip. And sure, I understand that some people with passion for games may have some items in their collection that only serve the purpose of being a collectible, guilty as charged, but even then, these people still usually have some sort of connection to that game. It's the people who see games as nothing more than a dollar sign that makes me want to barf. Of course, I'd love to also hear what makes you barf when it comes to rare games, or just any thoughts you may have in general. In particular, I'd be curious to hear about that one rare game you've always wanted but were never able to get. Or perhaps a rare game that you do own and it's very special to you for some sort of personal reason and not because of its monetary value. So be sure to leave your comments down below as always, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games.